On a stormy night, where rain falls relentlessly, a pregnant woman is forcibly removed from a luxury car and cruelly abandoned in the middle of a dense forest by a rich man who refused to take responsibility. The woman, alone and desperate, is about to give birth and, with no option, faces the most difficult labor of her life under the storm. When she finally gives birth and faints from exhaustion, leaving the newborn baby crying desperately in the darkness, a majestic white horse emerges from the forest shadows and hears the distressed cry of the small child under the freezing rain. What this animal does next defies everything you believe to be possible. Before we begin, if you love animals as much as we do, please subscribe to our channel now so you don't miss any moving stories. Thank you. Now, let's get back to our story. The rain fell like a curse upon the dense forest, each drop an echo of lament in the suffocating silence of the night. Helena clung to the car seat with desperate force, her nails digging into the leather as waves of pain coursed through her swollen belly. The baby moved restlessly, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them. "It hurts so much," she murmured, glancing sideways at Marcus, who drove with his knuckles white on the steering wheel. His expression was cold, distant, a complete departure from the affectionate man who had secretly comforted her in the hallways of his estate. "How much farther to the hospital?" He didn't answer immediately. The car's headlights cut through the darkness of the narrow road, revealing only trees that seemed to lean over them like threatening giants. Helena realized she didn't recognize this path. She had worked on his property for 2 years and knew the surrounding area well, but this road seemed to lead them to nowhere. "Marcus?" Her voice trembled, not just from the physical pain that struck her at ever shorter intervals. A strange feeling settled in her chest, a premonition that made her heart race beyond its normal rhythm. "Where are we?" His silence was more eloquent than any answer. Helena clutched her stomach as another contraction hit her, stronger this time, making her moan softly. The baby would be born soon. She could feel it. She needed to get to the hospital, needed medical help, people who knew how to bring her child into the world safely. When Marcus finally stopped the car, Helena looked around and felt her world collapse. There was no hospital, only trees, rain, and a darkness that seemed to swallow everything. The engine was cut, and the sound of the storm became deafening. "Get out," he said without looking her in the eye. "What do you mean?" Helena couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Marcus, the baby. He's coming. I need help." "I said, get out." His voice was icy, unrecognizable. The man who had whispered sweet words in her ear, who had promised to take care of her, had vanished completely. "I can't have you around anymore." Tears mixed with the rain that seeped through the slightly open window. In a terrible flash of lucidity, Helena understood she had been betrayed in the cruelest way possible. He never intended to take her to the hospital. This was his solution to the problem she represented in his perfect life. "This is your son too," she whispered, a protective hand over her belly. "It's your son, Marcus." "There is no son." He opened the door and got out, standing in the torrential downpour. "There was never anything between us. You're lying to blackmail me." Helena felt another contraction, this one so intense it made her double over. The baby was coming, whether she wanted it to or not. There was no more time for pleas or explanations. With a superhuman effort, she managed to get out of the car, her legs trembling as much from fear as from pain. "Please," she begged one last time, holding on to the car door. "Don't leave me here. I won't tell anyone, I promise." But Marcus was already getting back into the car. The headlights flashed on, illuminating Helena's rain-soaked, desperate face for a few seconds. Then he put the car in reverse and disappeared into the darkness, taking with him her last hope of surviving the night. Alone in the storm, with the baby pressing to be born, Helena dragged herself toward the trees in search of shelter. Each step was torture, each breath a struggle against the despair that threatened to consume her. The forest swallowed her in its dark embrace, and only the sound of her ragged breathing echoed among the trees, mixed with the sobs that began to well up from her broken heart. The rain hammered relentlessly on the leaves, creating a chaotic symphony that echoed through the forest. Helena staggered between the trunks, her hands sliding on the wet bark for support. Each contraction that hit her was like a bolt of lightning through her body, forcing her to stop and double over until the pain subsided. She found partial refuge under a large leafy tree, whose branches formed a kind of natural roof. It wasn't much, but it shielded her from the heaviest downpour. Helena knelt on the wet earth, feeling the dampness seep into her already soaked clothes. The cold cut into her skin like tiny blades, but she barely noticed it in the face of the pain that dominated all her senses. "Not yet, my baby," she murmured, caressing her belly with trembling hands. "It's not time yet?" But the baby didn't seem willing to wait. The contractions intensified, coming in ever closer waves. Helena realized with a mixture of terror and determination that the birth was inevitable. There would be no doctors, no nurses, no professional help. It would be just her, alone in the darkness, bringing her child into the world in the most primitive way possible. She took off her drenched coat and spread it on the ground, creating a slightly cleaner surface. Her hands shook so much she could barely unbutton her blouse, but the maternal instinct awakening in her chest was stronger than fear. She knew from some ancestral knowledge all women carry what she had to do. The pain reached a new level as the baby began to descend. Helena bit her lower lip so hard she tasted the metallic tang of blood mixing with the rainwater running down her face. She couldn't scream, couldn't allow herself to lose control. She needed to conserve her energy for what was to come. "You're going to be born," she whispered, the words coming out in ragged breaths. "My son, you will be born, and I will protect you. No matter what happens, I will protect you." Hours passed, or perhaps minutes that felt like an eternity. Helena lost track of time in the epic battle between her body and the forces of nature. The world shrank to that small space under the tree, where she fought to give life amidst the death that surrounded her. When she finally felt the baby's head crowning, Helena pushed herself up on her elbows and bore down with everything she had. The baby slipped from her arms in a single final contraction, tiny and perfect, crying with a strength that contrasted with his apparent fragility. "My boy," she wept, pulling the baby close to her chest. He was bluish from the cold, but he was breathing, crying, living. "My beautiful boy." Carefully, Helena wiped the baby's face with the sleeve of her blouse, removing what she could of the fluid that covered him. He was small, but he seemed strong. His lungs worked perfectly, judging by the cries that echoed through the forest. The umbilical cord still connected them, and Helena realized she had to cut it. Without proper tools, she searched for a sharp rock among the wet leaves. Her hands trembled so much it took several minutes to find the courage to make the cut. When she finally managed, she tied the cord with a piece of fabric torn from her skirt. She wrapped the baby in her blouse, trying to warm him as much as possible. He cried non-stop, a sound that broke her heart but also reassured her. As long as he was crying, he was alive. Exhaustion hit Helena like a giant wave. Her body had given everything it had, and now she felt completely drained. She held the baby against her chest, closed her eyes for a moment, and when she woke up, the baby was crying desperately, but he was no longer in her arms. Panic seized Helena like an internal storm. Her heart pounded as she staggered to her feet, desperately searching for the baby in the darkness. The cries came from somewhere nearby, but the rain and wind distorted the sounds, making them echo from all directions. "My son!" she screamed, forgetting to keep quiet. "Where is my son?" It was then that she saw it. A few yards away, a majestic white form stood out against the darkness of the forest. It was a horse, magnificent and serene, its pale coat gleaming even in the rain. And there, sheltered between the animal's front legs, was her baby. Helena froze for a moment, unsure how to react. The horse was huge. It could easily hurt the child unintentionally. But when she looked closer, she noticed something extraordinary. The animal had positioned itself to shield the baby from the rain, using its own body as a shelter. Its hooves were carefully planted on the ground, forming a natural barrier around the infant. "Please," Helena murmured, approaching slowly with her hands outstretched. "Please don't hurt my baby." The horse turned its majestic head in her direction, and Helena's breath caught in her throat. The animal's eyes were deep and intelligent, seeming to understand exactly what was happening. There was no aggression in its gaze, only a gentleness she would never have expected to find in a wild creature. The baby continued to cry, but he seemed safe and protected. Helena moved closer, treading carefully so as not to startle the horse. With each step, she expected the animal to shy away or show signs of discomfort, but it remained motionless, as if it were waiting for her. "Thank you," she whispered, finally getting close enough to touch her baby. "Thank you for protecting him." The horse lowered its head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost human in its understanding. Helena carefully knelt and picked up her baby, who immediately quieted in her arms. The little one was warm, shielded from the cold and rain by the animal's body. When she stood up, the horse took a few steps back, but didn't move away completely. It stayed there, watching mother and child with those deep, intelligent eyes. Helena noticed that the animal wasn't wild. There was a saddle on its back, though it was riderless. "You must have an owner," she murmured, gently stroking the horse's muzzle. "Someone who's looking for you." The horse neighed softly, an almost melancholy sound that echoed through the forest. Helena had the strange impression that the animal was trying to communicate with her, to tell her something important. The rain began to ease, but the cold intensified. Helena realized she needed to find more suitable shelter for herself and the baby. Her clothes were completely soaked, and she was starting to feel the first signs of hypothermia. The baby, in turn, was starting to get fussy again. As if reading her thoughts, the horse came closer and stood beside her. Helena understood the message. The animal was offering help, suggesting she ride it. "You want to help us?" she asked, hardly believing the situation. "You want to take us somewhere safe?" The horse dipped its head, and Helena was certain it was a sign of agreement. Carefully, holding the baby firmly against her chest, she approached the animal. Mounting would be difficult in her condition, but she had to try. With a strength she didn't know she still possessed, Helena managed to climb onto the horse. The animal remained perfectly still throughout the process, as if it knew exactly how fragile her situation was. Once she was settled in the saddle, the horse began to move slowly through the forest, its steps careful and measured. Helena didn't know where it was taking her, but for the first time since being abandoned, she felt a spark of hope. The horse moved with impressive confidence through the dark forest, its hooves finding firm ground, even on the most treacherous stretches. Helena clung to the reins with one hand, while holding the baby tightly against her chest with the other. With every step the animal took, she felt immense gratitude for this creature that had appeared like an angel in her most desperate hour. The storm finally subsided, leaving only a fine mist that dripped from the tree leaves. With the rain lessening, Helena could better hear the sounds of the surrounding forest, the hoot of night birds, the rustling of small animals in the undergrowth. and most importantly, the calm, steady breathing of the baby in her arms. After what seemed like hours of walking, the horse stopped before a small, natural cave formed among moss-covered rocks. The animal turned its head to Helena, as if asking if this spot was suitable. She looked around and saw it was perfect. The cave offered protection from the rain and wind, but was small enough to retain body heat. "Is this it?" she asked softly, and the horse neighed quietly in response. Getting off the animal was harder than getting on, especially with the baby in her arms and her body still sore from childbirth. The horse lowered itself slightly, making the descent easier, another gesture that demonstrated its exceptional intelligence. Once on the ground, Helena carefully explored the cave. The floor was covered with dry leaves that had blown in over time, creating a relatively soft surface. It wasn't the comfort of a bed, but it was infinitely better than the wet forest floor. The baby began to cry again, and Helena realized it was time to feed him. She found a corner of the cave where she could sit comfortably and put the child to her breast. The sensation was new and strange, but also profoundly natural. The baby calmed immediately, nursing with strength and determination. As she fed him, Helena watched the horse, which remained at the cave entrance like a vigilant sentinel. The animal looked alternately at the forest and at her, as if standing guard. Its presence was comforting, a source of safety in a world that had become dangerous and uncertain. "What's your name?" she murmured to the horse. "You must have a name, must have a family that's worried about you." The animal turned its ears toward her, attentive to her words. Helena decided to call him Hope, because that was exactly what he represented to her at that moment. When the baby finished nursing and fell asleep in her arms, Helena finally had a moment to process everything that had happened. Marcus's betrayal, the cruel abandonment, the solitary birth in the forest, and now the unexpected protection of this extraordinary horse. It was as if she were living a nightmare and a miracle at the same time. Tears began to stream down her face as she gently stroked the baby's face. He was so small, so vulnerable. How would she manage to raise him alone, without resources, without support, hidden in a forest? The reality of her situation began to weigh on her shoulders like a mountain. Hope seemed to sense her despair. The horse approached and lowered its head, gently nudging Helena's shoulder with its muzzle. The gesture was so human, so full of compassion, that she couldn't hold back a sob. "I don't know what to do," she confessed to the animal. "I don't know how we're going to survive." The horse remained by her side, its presence warm and comforting. Helena realized that, for the first time since her abandonment, she didn't feel completely alone. There was someone or something that cared about her and her baby, that was willing to protect them. As the night wore on, Helena fell asleep leaning against the cave wall, the baby safe in her arms and Hope vigilant at the entrance. Helena woke to the first ray of sunlight filtering through the cave entrance. Her body ached as if she'd been hit by a truck, every muscle protesting the simplest movements. The baby slept peacefully in her arms, his breathing soft and regular. Hope was exactly where she had last seen him, standing guard at the entrance. The reality of her situation hit Helena with full force. She was alone in a forest, without food, clean water, or proper clothing, with a newborn baby to care for. The magnitude of the challenge she faced was terrifying, but something inside her, a fierce maternal instinct she never knew she possessed, refused to surrender to despair. "We need water," she said to Hope, as if the horse could understand. Every word. To her surprise, the animal raised its head and began to walk away from the cave, looking back as if expecting her to follow. Carrying the baby carefully, Helena left the cave and followed the horse through the forest. Hope led her down a path she never would have found on her own, winding through dense trees and thorny bushes. After a few minutes' walk, she heard the Most beautiful sound in the world, running water. A small, crystal-clear stream ran between the rocks, its cool, clean water sparkling in the morning light. Helena knelt on the bank and drank greedily, quenching a thirst she hadn't realized was so intense. Then she wet her hands and gently cleaned the baby's face, who woke up and watched her with those dark, deep little eyes. "At least we have water," she murmured, feeling a small victory in the face of the first problem solved. Hope grazed peacefully nearby, but Helena noticed the animal kept a constant watch, its ears always twitching, catching any suspicious sound from the forest. It was like having a personal bodyguard, something she had never imagined needing in her simple life as a housekeeper. The baby started to cry, and Helena realized he was hungry again. She found a flat rock near the stream and sat down to nurse him. While he fed, she scanned the surrounding forest for anything edible. Her mother had taught her a few things about wild plants when she was a child, knowledge she never imagined would be vital to her survival. She saw some wild blackberries growing on nearby bushes. After the baby finished nursing, she carefully placed him in a soft hollow between the roots of a tree and went to pick the berries. Hope immediately positioned himself near the child, taking on the role of protector without Helena having to ask. The blackberries were small and tart, but they were her first meal in almost 24 hours. Helena ate slowly, savoring each berry as if it were a feast. She needed to keep up her strength to produce milk for the baby. Over the next few days, a routine was established. Hope would lead Helena to water sources and places where edible fruits grew. The horse seemed to have an instinctive knowledge of the forest, knowing exactly where to find what they needed. Helena began to wonder if the animal wasn't in some way magical. The baby grew stronger each day, his cries becoming more vigorous and his periods of alertness longer. Helena mentally named him Michael in honor of the protective archangel, as she felt they needed all the heavenly protection they could get. The nights were the hardest. Alone in the cave, with only the baby and the horse for company, Helena fought against waves of sadness and despair. The memories of Marcus's betrayal tormented her, mixed with worries about the future. How would she get out of this forest? How would she find a decent life for her son? But whenever hopelessness threatened to consume her, she would look at Michael, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and find the strength to go on. He depended on her completely, and she would not fail him, as Marcus had failed them both. A week had passed since that terrible night, and Helena was beginning to believe she might be able to survive in the forest indefinitely. Michael was growing strong and healthy, and her bond with Hope deepened each day. The horse was not just a protector, but a true companion, almost as if he could read her thoughts and anticipate her needs. It was on a sunny afternoon, while Helena was collecting medicinal herbs she had learned to identify, that she heard the sound that made her blood run cold. Human footsteps echoed through the forest, accompanied by low voices and heavy breathing. Someone was approaching. Hope's head shot up immediately, his ears alert and his muscles tense. The horse positioned himself between Helena and the direction of the sounds, clearly sensing the danger. Helena quickly scooped up Michael and hid behind a thick tree trunk, her heart pounding so hard she feared it could be heard. The voices grew, clearer as they approached, and Helena recognized one of them with a shock that made her tremble from head to toe. It was Marcus. He had come back. "Are you sure this is where you left her?" An unfamiliar, rough voice asked impatiently. "I'm sure," Marcus replied, his voice laced with a tension Helena had never heard before. "It was right here. She couldn't have gotten far, especially in her condition. It's been a week, boss. If she was really in labor like you said, well, the woods are dangerous. There are wild animals, the storm that night." "I need to be sure," Marcus interrupted sharply. "I need to know she's really dead. I can't leave any loose ends." Helena clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a cry of horror. He hadn't come back to save her or out of remorse. He had come back to make sure she was dead, to ensure his secret was buried with her in the forest. Marcus's cruelty was even greater than she had imagined. Michael stirred in her arms, starting to make small noises that could draw attention. Helena pressed him against her chest, whispering silent prayers for him to stay quiet. Hope moved closer to them, positioning himself as an additional barrier between the makeshift family and the approaching men. "Look at this," the unfamiliar voice said. "There are hoof prints here. A horse has been in this area recently." Helena felt her stomach clench. Hope's tracks could lead them right to her. The horse seemed to understand the danger too, because he moved away silently, trying to obscure the trail. A horse? Marcus sounded intrigued. What would a horse be doing out here in the woods alone? Maybe it ran off from a nearby farm, or maybe... The voice hesitated. Maybe she wasn't as alone as you thought. The silence that followed was tense and menacing. Helena could practically hear Marcus's thoughts rearranging, trying to understand the implications of this discovery. "Look for signs of a camp," he ordered finally. "Human footprints, leftover food, anything that indicates someone has been living here." Helena closed her eyes and prayed, as she had never prayed before. If they found the cave, if they discovered the signs of her presence, all would be lost. Michael would never get the chance to grow up, to know a world beyond this dark forest. The sounds of the men gradually faded, but Helena didn't move for hours. Only when the sun began to set and the forest returned to its natural silence did she dare to emerge from her hiding place. Hope approached immediately, gently touching her shoulder with his muzzle, as if to comfort her. "He came back," she whispered to the horse, tears streaming down her face. "He came back to make sure we were dead." The reality of her situation became even clearer at that moment. She wasn't just fighting for survival in the woods. She was running from a man who wanted her dead, a man powerful enough to make any evidence of his crimes disappear. 3 days had passed since Marcus's terrifying visit, and Helena lived in a constant state of alert. Every rustle in the forest made her flinch. Every shadow that moved among the trees seemed a threat. Hope was also more vigilant, rarely straying from her side and keeping his ears constantly pricked for any suspicious sound. It was on a misty morning, while Helena was trying to wash Michael's makeshift diapers in the stream, that she heard a different voice echoing through the forest. This time, however, there was no hostility in the tone, only genuine concern. "Hope? Hope, where are you, old friend?" Helena froze, clutching Michael to her chest. The voice belonged to an older man, filled with affection and anxiety. Hope's head shot up, his ears perking up in recognition. The horse neighed softly, a sound of almost pure joy. "Someone's looking for you," Helena whispered to the horse. "Your real owner." Hope looked at her with those deep, intelligent eyes, and Helena had the strange impression that the animal was making an important decision. He approached her and gently nudged her shoulder with his muzzle, a gesture she had learned to interpret as comfort and protection. The voice grew closer, accompanied by the sound of careful steps on the damp undergrowth. Helena knew she should hide, but something in the tone of that voice reassured her. There was no threat there, only love and concern for a lost animal. "Hope, Rosie is so worried about you. You've been gone for a week, old boy." Helena's heart ached. Hope had a family that cared for him, people who were suffering from his absence. The horse had sacrificed his own safety and the comfort of his home to protect her and Michael. Just then, the farmer appeared in a nearby clearing. He was a man in his 60s, with graying hair and a face weathered by years of working in the sun. His clothes were simple but clean, and in his eyes, Helena saw a kindness she had forgotten existed in the world. The man stopped abruptly when he saw Hope, his face lighting up with relief and joy. "There you are, you stubborn old thing," he exclaimed, approaching the horse with open arms. "I knew you hadn't gone too far." It was only then that the farmer noticed Helena. She was partially hidden behind a tree, but the baby in her arms was clearly visible. The man stopped short, his eyes widening in surprise. "Good Lord," he murmured, looking from Helena to Hope and back again. "Ma'am, what are you doing out here in the woods with a baby?" Helena hesitated, her instinct telling her to run, but Hope positioned himself between her and the farmer, clearly signaling that the man was no threat. The horse knew this man, trusted him. Helena began, but her voice failed her. How could she explain her situation without sounding like a madwoman? How could she make this kind stranger understand the betrayal and abandonment she had suffered? The farmer took a few cautious steps toward her, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "It's all right," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Arthur Coleman. This is my land, and Hope is my horse." Tears began to stream down Helena's face. The kindness in the man's voice, after days of fear and loneliness, was almost too much for her to bear. "He saved me," she managed to say, her voice breaking. "Hope saved me and my baby." Arthur looked at the horse with an expression of understanding and pride. "He's always been a special one," the farmer said. "But tell me, ma'am, how did you end up alone in the forest with a child so small?" Helena looked into Arthur's kind eyes and made the decision that would change the course of her life. For the first time since her abandonment, she would tell someone the truth. "My name is Helena," she began, her voice gaining strength, "and this is a story you might not believe." The words flowed from Helena like a broken dam. Sitting on a rock near the stream, with Michael sleeping peacefully in her arms and Hope grazing serenely nearby, she told her entire story to Arthur. The farmer listened in silence, his face moving through a range of expressions: surprise, indignation, compassion, and finally, a fierce determination. "This man abandoned you in the forest during a storm?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling with restrained anger. "Pregnant and in labor?" Helena nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Reliving that terrible night, even for someone who clearly cared, was still too painful. "And he came back to make sure you were dead," Arthur continued, running a hand through his gray hair. "Good God, what kind of monster does something like that? A powerful man who can't afford any scandals," Helena answered bitterly. "Marcus Vance, from the Vance family. They own half the textile industry in this region." Arthur stood up abruptly, beginning to pace back and forth. "I know that name," he said, his voice thick with contempt. "I've heard stories about that family. People who think money can buy anything, even silence about their crimes." Helena watched the farmer, seeing in him an integrity she hadn't found in anyone for a long time. Arthur was a simple man, but he had a moral strength that Marcus, with all his wealth and influence, would never possess. "You can't stay here in the forest," Arthur said finally, stopping in front of her. "Not with a newborn. You need medical care, proper food, a safe place to recover." "But he'll look for me," Helena protested. "If he finds out I'm alive, he won't stop until he finds me. And now I know he won't hesitate to kill me to protect his secrets." Arthur knelt before her, his kind eyes fixed on hers. "Let me take you. I'm home," he said softly. "My wife, Rosie, and we lost our only son 5 years ago. An accident. Our house has been too quiet, too empty ever since. Maybe we can help each other." Helena felt tears burning in her eyes. Arthur's offer was more than she dared hope for, but fear still paralyzed her. "What if he finds out where I am?" she whispered. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." "Our farm is in an isolated area," Arthur explained. "Few people know it exists, and those who do are trustworthy neighbors. Besides, Rosie was a nurse before we got married. She can take proper care of you and the baby." Hope approached at that moment, as if to give his approval to the plan. The horse gently touched Helena's shoulder, a gesture she had learned to interpret as encouragement. "See?" Arthur smiled for the first time since he found her. "Even Hope agrees. He's got an excellent instinct for good people and bad." Helena looked at Michael, who slept peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the decisions that would determine his future. He deserved more than a life of fear and flight in the forest. He deserved safety, medical care, a chance to grow up healthy and strong. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked, still hesitant. Arthur smiled sadly. "Because Hope brought you to us for a reason," he answered. "My horse has never disappeared before. He knew you needed help, and maybe he knew we needed you too." Helena closed her eyes and said a silent prayer. When she opened them again, she had made her decision. "All right," she said, her voice firm for the first time in days. "I accept your help." Arthur stood up and extended a hand to her. "Then let's go home," he said simply. "Rosie will be so happy to meet you." The Coleman farm appeared like an oasis of peace after the tumultuous week in the forest. The house was simple but welcoming, painted white with blue trim, surrounded by a carefully tended garden where roses and sunflowers bloomed in abundance. A spacious porch with rocking chairs completed the picture-perfect scene of rural tranquility. Rosie came running out of the house the moment she saw Arthur approaching with Hope. She was a woman in her 50s, with brown hair tied in a bun and a floral apron that suggested she'd been cooking. Her face lit up at the sight of the horse, but her expression quickly changed to surprise and concern when she noticed Helena mounted on the animal, holding a baby. "Arthur, what?" she began, but stopped when she saw Helena's condition: torn and dirty clothes, a thin face marked by exhaustion, and eyes still full of fear. "This is Helena," Arthur said softly, helping her down from Hope. "She and the baby need our help." Rosie didn't ask any questions. In seconds, she was by Helena's side, supporting her with firm, experienced arms. "My goodness, dear, you're exhausted," she murmured, her voice filled with maternal compassion. "And this little one, how long ago was he born?" "A week," Helena replied, her voice barely a whisper. "A week?" Rosie looked at her husband in alarm. "Arthur, take Hope to the barn. I need to take care of this child and her mother immediately." Inside the house, Helena was enveloped in a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the warmth of a true home, of people who genuinely cared. The living room was decorated with simple but comfortable furniture, family photos on the walls, and the delicious aroma of homemade bread wafting from the kitchen. Rosie led her to a small, cozy bedroom with a double bed covered by a handmade quilt in shades of blue and white. "This was our son Gabriel's room," Rosie said softly, fluffing the pillows. "He would have been 25 now." Helena could hear the pain in the older woman's voice, but also a serene acceptance that came from years of processed grief. "I'm so sorry," Helena murmured. "Don't be," Rosie smiled sadly. "Life takes some things, but it gives others. Maybe that's why you're here." Rosie examined Michael with the skill of someone who had cared for many babies over the years. Her hands were gentle but firm, checking reflexes, breathing, and general vital signs. "He's healthy," she announced finally, and Helena felt immense relief flood her chest. "A little underweight, but considering the circumstances, he's in excellent shape. You did an amazing job taking care of him." Tears of gratitude streamed down Helena's face. For the first time since Michael's birth, she heard from someone qualified that her son was okay. "Now it's your turn," Rosie said firmly. "When was the last time you had a proper meal?" Helena couldn't answer. Her diet in the forest had consisted mainly of wild berries and stream water. Rosie shook her head in disapproval and left the room, returning minutes later with a tray laden with food, steaming chicken soup, fresh bread, fruit, and a large glass of milk. "Eat," she ordered gently. "You need your strength to produce milk for the baby." While Helena ate, each spoonful a small miracle of flavor and nourishment, Rosie prepared a warm bath. The lavender-scented water was the most luxurious thing Helena had experienced in a long time. She sank into the tub, feeling the dirt and fear of the last few days slowly dissolve. Rosie had left clean clothes for her, a simple but well-cut dress, fresh undergarments, and a soft robe. When Helena looked in the mirror for the first time in over a week, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She was thinner, with deep, dark circles under her eyes, but there was something new in them, a strength that wasn't there before. When she returned to the room, she found Arthur waiting with Michael in his arms. The farmer was rocking the baby with the natural ease of someone who had cared for children before, and Michael seemed completely relaxed in his arms. "He's beautiful," Arthur said simply, "and strong. He'll grow up to be a man of character, I'm sure of it." "I told Arthur about your situation," Rosie said softly. "We hope you don't mind. We needed to know so we could protect you properly." Helena nodded, realizing she didn't feel exposed or vulnerable. For the first time in a long time, she felt protected. While Helena found peace and safety on the Coleman farm, 50 miles away in the Vance estate, a storm of a very different nature was brewing. Marcus paced nervously in his mahogany office, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor as he mentally crafted the version of events that would protect his reputation. The first person he needed to convince was the most dangerous, his wife, Isabella Sinclair Vance. She was the daughter of one of the most influential families in local society, an intelligent and perceptive woman who had married him for social convenience, but who would not tolerate scandals that could tarnish the Sinclair name. "Darling," Marcus said as Isabella entered the office, elegant in her beige suit, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. "I need to talk to you about a delicate matter." Isabella sat in the leather armchair across from his desk, her perfectly manicured hands folded in her lap. Her sharp blue eyes, always observant, studied her husband's face. "I'm listening," she said simply. "It's about Helena, our former housekeeper," Marcus began, his voice carefully modulated. "She disappeared a week ago, and I've discovered something disturbing about her." Isabella arched an eyebrow, but remained silent. "She was trying to blackmail me," Marcus continued, the lies flowing with an ease that would have horrified Helena if she could have heard them. "She claimed to be pregnant and said the child was mine, obviously a desperate attempt to extort money from the family." "Obviously," Isabella repeated, her voice neutral, but her eyes narrowing slightly. "When I refused to pay, she stole a considerable sum from the office safe and ran off," Marcus invented, feeling more confident with each word. "I've already filed a police report for the theft." Isabella remained silent for a few moments, her fingers tapping lightly on the arm of the chair. Marcus knew this gesture. It meant she was processing information and making decisions. "How much did she steal?" Isabella finally asked. $20,000, Marcus replied promptly. "Cash I kept for emergencies." "And you're sure she ran off? She wasn't eliminated by someone who discovered the theft?" The question made Marcus's blood run cold, but he kept his expression impassive. "I don't know," he answered. "The police are investigating. I hope she's found alive so she can return the money and face the consequences of her actions." Isabella rose slowly, smoothing the skirt of her suit. "I see," she said. "I'll make sure our entire staff is aware of what happened. It's important that everyone knows we do not tolerate dishonesty." In our home. After Isabella left, Marcus allowed himself a sigh of relief. The first hurdle was cleared. Now he had to ensure that all the remaining staff at the estate corroborated his version of the facts. He called a meeting with the entire domestic team in the dining room. 5 people gathered before him: the cook, Maria, the gardener, John, the cleaner, Carmen, the driver, Paul, and the new housekeeper who had been hired to replace Helena. "You all knew Helena," Marcus began, his voice taking on an authoritarian tone. "And now you know that she stole from us before she ran away." Maria, who had worked for the family for 15 years, dared to speak up. "Mr. Vance, with all due respect, Helena wasn't the type to steal. She was an honest, hard-working girl." "That's exactly what she wanted you to think," Marcus interrupted sharply. "Dishonest people are often the most convincing. She fooled, that's all." John, the gardener, looked uncomfortable. "But sir, she seemed so worried these past few weeks, like she was afraid of something. It didn't seem like she was planning a theft." Marcus felt his irritation grow. The staff was proving harder to convince than he had anticipated. "Afraid of being found out, no doubt," he said dryly. "Look, I'm not interested in your opinions of her character. I'm here to inform you of the facts. Helena stole from this family and fled. If the police come asking questions, you will say exactly that. There is no room for speculation or romantic theories about her supposed honesty." The silence that followed was tense. Marcus could see the reluctance on the staff's faces, but he could also see the fear. They knew he had enough power to destroy their lives if they didn't cooperate. "Do you understand?" he asked, his voice laced with an implicit threat. "One by one." They nodded, but Marcus noticed the resistance in their eyes. It worried him, but he hoped the fear of losing their jobs would be enough to keep their mouths shut. Isabella Sinclair Vance was not a woman who accepted stories at face value. Born into a family where politics and business had always intertwined, she had learned early on to read between the lines and question overly convenient narratives. The story Marcus had told about Helena had obvious holes that bothered her deeply. That night, after Marcus had fallen asleep, Isabella slipped quietly out of bed and went down to his office. She knew the combination to the safe. After all, it was her money in there too. If Helena had really stolen $20,000, there should be some evidence, some record of the missing amount. She opened the safe and counted the money carefully. Nothing was missing. In fact, there was more cash in there than usual. Isabella frowned, checking again. No, there were definitely no signs of a theft. She sat in Marcus's chair and began to review the papers on his desk. It was then that she found something interesting. A medical receipt from a private lab, dated 2 weeks prior. The name on the receipt was Helena Santos, and the test was for a pregnancy. Isabella's blood ran cold. Marcus had paid for a pregnancy test for Helena. Why would an employer pay for such an intimate medical test for a housekeeper unless... She kept searching and found more disturbing evidence. There were receipts for expensive gifts, jewelry, perfume, lingerie, all purchased in recent weeks from stores where she knew Marcus would never buy anything for her. The dates coincided with the period he claimed Helena was plotting against them. But the most damning discovery was a letter Helena had written to Marcus, found crumpled in the office trash can. With trembling hands, Isabella smoothed out the paper and read, "Marcus, I'm scared. The baby will be born soon, and I need to know what you plan to do. You promised you'd take care of us, but now you act like I'm a burden I never asked for. Much. I just want my son to have a father who acknowledges him. Please give me an answer. With love, Helena." Isabella closed her eyes, feeling a mix of anger, disgust, and a deep pain she hadn't expected. Marcus hadn't just betrayed their marriage. He had abandoned a woman pregnant with his child. And now he was inventing lies to cover his cowardice. But there was something else in the letter that worried her. Helena spoke of the baby being born soon, as if she had written it recently. If she had run away a week ago, where would she have given birth? And more importantly, why did Marcus seem so confident that she wouldn't come back to cause trouble? A terrible suspicion began to form in Isabella's mind. She had known her husband for 10 years and knew what he was capable of when his reputation was threatened. Marcus wasn't just an adulterer, he was a dangerous man when cornered. The next morning, Isabella made a decision that would change everything. She dressed carefully, choosing a discreet but elegant outfit, and drove to the local police station. Not to report her husband yet. She didn't have enough evidence, but to find out if a police report had actually been filed against Helena. The police chief, Chief Evans, received her with the deference reserved for people of her social standing. "Mrs. Vance, it's always a pleasure. How can I help you?" "Chief Evans, my husband mentioned he filed a report against a former employee of ours, a Helena Santos, for theft. I'd like to know the status of the case." The chief consulted his files, frowning. "That's strange," he murmured. "Don't find any record of a report against this person. Are you sure your husband filed it here?" Isabella maintained a serene expression, but inside her heart was racing. "Perhaps he forgot to mention which station he filed it at," she said, casually. "Could you check with other precincts in the area?" After a few calls, the chief confirmed her suspicions. There was no police report against Helena Santos anywhere. "Mrs. Vance," the chief said gently, "perhaps there's been some misunderstanding. Your husband might have changed his mind about filing the report." "Perhaps," Isabella replied, but her mind was already racing in other directions. Leaving the station, she made a decision that would surprise anyone who knew her. Instead of confronting Marcus directly, she would do something much more dangerous. She would investigate what really happened to Helena Santos on her own. Because one thing Isabella knew for sure, her husband had lied about everything, and if he was capable of lying so elaborately about a non-existent theft, what else was he capable of to protect his secrets? The answer to that question could be more terrifying than she was prepared to discover. 2 weeks had passed since Helena found refuge on the Coleman farm. Michael had gained weight and become a healthy, smiling baby who loved being rocked by Rosie and seemed fascinated by Hope's constant presence. Helena, for her part, had regained her strength and begun to help with chores on the farm, finding a peace she never imagined possible. It was on a sunny Thursday afternoon that this tranquility was shattered by the unexpected arrival of a black car on the property. Helena was in the garden, playing with Michael under the shade of a tree, when she heard the engine sound. Her blood ran cold instantly. Could it be Marcus? Had he finally found out where she was? Arthur came out of the house to greet the visitor, and Helena was surprised to see an elegant woman get out of the car. She was blonde, wore expensive clothes, and had a posture that screamed upper class. For a terrible moment, Helena thought it was one of Marcus's associates come to take her back. But as the woman approached Arthur, Helena noticed something in her expression that wasn't hostility, but rather a determination mixed with nervousness. "Good afternoon," the woman said, her voice polite but tense. "My name is Isabella Vance. I'm looking for a woman named Helena Santos." Helena felt the world spin upon hearing the last name. Vance. It was Marcus's wife. Instinctively, she clutched Michael and prepared to run, but Arthur made a discreet gesture for her to stay put. "And why would you be looking for this person?" Arthur asked cautiously. Isabella hesitated for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Because I believe my husband has done her a great wrong," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "And I need to make it right." Helena froze. This was not what she had expected to hear from Marcus's wife. Arthur studied Isabella for a few moments, then turned and gestured for Helena to approach. On trembling legs, carrying Michael in her arms, Helena walked toward them. "Helena?" Isabella asked when she saw her, and Helena nodded, unable to speak. "My God, you're alive, and this is my son," Helena managed to whisper. "Michael." Isabella looked at the baby with a complex expression, pain, anger, and something that looked like compassion. "May I speak with you?" Isabella asked. "There are things you need to know and things I need to tell you." They sat on the Coleman's porch, with Rosie serving coffee and Arthur staying close by, ready to protect Helena if needed. Michael slept peacefully in his mother's arms, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. "I know about the two of you," Isabella began directly. "I know about the relationship, the pregnancy, and I know Marcus lied about everything that happened." Helena felt tears burn in her eyes. "I never wanted to destroy your marriage," she said. I just wanted him to take responsibility for his son." "I know," Isabella replied softly. "I found your letter. I saw the gifts he bought for you, the medical receipts, and I found out he never filed a police report against you for theft." "Theft?" Helena looked confused. "It's the story he invented to explain your disappearance," Isabella explained. "He told everyone you were trying to blackmail him and that you stole money before you ran away." The rage Helena had tried to suppress for weeks finally erupted. "He abandoned me in a forest during a storm," she cried out, making Michael stir in her arms. "I was in labor, and he left me there to die." Isabella closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew he'd done something terrible. Marcus is a lot of bad things, but he's never been a murderer." "He came back," Helena continued, her voice trembling. "A week later, he came back to make sure I was dead." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with implications. Finally, Isabella raised her head and looked directly into Helena's eyes. "I will help you get justice," she said, her voice firm and determined. "I will testify against him. I will provide all the evidence I've collected. Marcus has to pay for what he's done." Helena could hardly believe what she was hearing. The wife of her tormentor was offering to help bring him down. The courtroom was packed on that September morning. Helena had never imagined she would one day be sitting on the witness stand, facing the man who had tried to destroy her life and her sons. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't hide the desperation in his eyes. Beside him, his defense attorney nervously shuffled through case files. 3 months had passed since Isabella had found Helena at the Coleman farm. 3 months of police investigation, evidence gathering, and preparation for this moment. Chief Evans, who had initially been misled by Marcus's lies, was now leading the case with ironclad determination after discovering the truth. "The prosecution may call its first witness," said the judge, the Honorable Henry Morgan, a serious man in his 50s known for his integrity. "We call Mrs. Isabella Sinclair Vance to the stand," the prosecutor announced. Isabella rose from the gallery and walked to the witness stand with the dignity that had always defined her. She was dressed simply but elegantly, her face showing the resolve of someone who had made the most difficult decision of her life. "Mrs. Vance," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court how you discovered the truth about what happened to Helena Santos?" In a firm, clear voice, Isabella recounted her discovery of the evidence in Marcus's office, the gift receipts, Helena's letter, the non-existent police report. Every word was like a hammer blow on the coffin of her husband's lies. "And why did you decide to testify against the defendant, your own husband?" the prosecutor asked. Isabella looked directly at Marcus, who averted his gaze. "Because the truth is more important than convenience," she answered. "Because an innocent woman and her baby nearly died because of his cowardly actions. And because I have a young daughter, and I want her to grow up in a world where justice prevails over power and money." Marcus's attorney tried to discredit Isabella's testimony, suggesting she was motivated by the revenge of a scorned wife. But the evidence was too irrefutable, and Isabella's dignity withstood every attack. Next, the staff from the Vance estate were called. Maria, John, Carmen, and Paul all had found the courage to tell the truth. They reported how Marcus had pressured them to lie about Helena, how they knew she was an honest person, how they had noticed the fear in her eyes during her final weeks of work. "Helena never stole anything," Maria declared, her voice trembling with emotion. "She was a good, hard-working girl, and she was pregnant. Anyone could see that. Mr. Vance, he took advantage of her situation." When it was Helena's turn to testify, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. She rose slowly, holding Michael in her arms. The judge had allowed her to bring the baby, recognizing that he was living evidence of the facts. "Helena Santos," the prosecutor said gently, "can you tell the court what happened on the night of June 15th? With a voice that was initially shaky but gained strength as she spoke, Helena recounted the entire terrible experience. The relationship with Marcus, the promises he made, the discovery of the pregnancy, and finally, the night of the abandonment in the forest. "He told me he was taking me to the hospital," she said, looking directly at Marcus. "But he took me to the forest and left me there, knowing I was in labor. He wanted me to die." Marcus's lawyer tried to suggest that Helena was lying, that she was trying to extort money from the family. But when the prosecutor presented the medical evidence, the DNA test confirming Michael was Marcus's son, the pregnancy medical records he had paid for, the photographs of the condition in which Helena was found, the defense crumbled. Arthur and Rosie also testified, describing the state in which they found Helena and how Hope had protected mother and child in the forest. Even the local veterinarian was called to attest to the horse's exceptional behavior. When it came time for closing arguments, the prosecutor stood and looked directly at the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, "this is not just a case of abandonment. This is a case of attempted murder against a defenseless woman and her unborn child. Marcus Vance used his power and position to take advantage of a vulnerable employee, and when she became a problem, he tried to eliminate her in the cruelest way possible. The verdict was unanimous: guilty of attempted murder, reckless endangerment, and witness tampering. Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in prison and ordered to pay a substantial settlement to Helena and Michael. When the judge banged his gavel, Helena felt as if a giant weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Beside her, Isabella wept silently, not from sadness, but from relief at having done the right thing. Outside the courthouse, Helena met up with the Colemans, who had become her true family. Michael, now 6 months old, was strong and healthy, in Rosie's arms. "It's over," Arthur said simply, hugging Helena. "It's finally over." A year later, the green hills of the Coleman farm shone under the golden sun of a perfect spring morning. Helena sat on the porch, watching Michael take his first wobbly steps across the lawn. The boy, now over a year old, had grown strong and healthy, his dark eyes shining with the same determination that had once saved his mother's life. Hope grazed peacefully nearby, but always kept a watchful eye on the boy he had helped protect since birth. The connection between them was extraordinary. Michael would run to the horse whenever he felt scared, and Hope would lower his majestic head to receive clumsy pats from the little hands. "He's going to be a natural horseman," Arthur commented, sitting down next to Helena with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Hope has never been so protective of anyone." Helena smiled, accepting the coffee and inhaling the aroma that had become synonymous with home for her. The Coleman farm was no longer just a temporary refuge. It was her real home, the place where she and Michael had found not only safety, but a family that loved them unconditionally. "Sometimes it still feels like a dream," she murmured, watching. Rosie approached from the garden with a basket of fresh flowers. "After everything that happened, to have found you, to have found peace." Arthur placed a fatherly hand on her shoulder. "Life has a strange way of fixing things," he said philosophically. "We lost Gabriel, and you two needed a family. Hope brought you to us at the exact moment we all needed each other." The settlement Helena had received from Marcus was being used wisely. Part of the money was invested in a college fund for Michael, and another part had been used to make improvements on the Coleman farm, turning it into a small rural paradise. Helena had insisted on contributing, considering herself part of the family. Isabella visited regularly, having developed an unexpected friendship with Helena. Marcus's ex-wife had divorced him immediately after the trial and now worked for a foundation that helped women who were victims of domestic violence. Her own experience with Marcus had opened her eyes to realities her privileged life had kept hidden. "Aunt Izzy's here!" Michael shouted excitedly, running toward the gate where Isabella's car had just pulled up. Isabella got out of the car, smiling, her arms open to receive the boy she had come to love like a nephew. She brought gifts, as always, this time a small wooden horse that Michael hugged with delight. "How's my little hero?" she asked, kissing the boy's forehead. "And how's his brave mom?" Helena stood up to embrace her friend, still marveling at the twists of fate that had turned her tormentor's wife into one of the most important people in her new life. "We're good," Helena answered. "Better than I ever imagined we could be." During lunch, the conversation turned to plans for the future. Helena had decided to enroll in an online nursing program, inspired by the care Rosie had given her during her most difficult days. She wanted to help other women who went through situations similar to hers. "Michael can stay with us during your clinicals," Rosie offered, as if reading her thoughts. "He's so used to us. He won't even miss you." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Helena found herself alone with Michael in the garden. The boy had fallen asleep in her arms, and she sat under the tree where she used to nurse him when they were just two frightened refugees in a dark forest. Hope approached and lowered his head to gently touch Helena's shoulder, as he always did, when he sensed she was reflecting on the past. "Thank you," she whispered to the horse, as she did every night. "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for bringing us home." In prison, 50 miles away, Marcus stared through the bars of his cell at the stars beginning to appear in the dark sky. 12 years seemed like an eternity, and he had lost everything: fortune, reputation, family. But for the first time since his imprisonment, he looked at the stars and felt something he had never experienced before: genuine remorse. He had destroyed his own life by trying to destroy Helena's. He had lost the chance to know his son, to be the father Michael deserved. And now, in the silent nights of his cell, he finally understood that true wealth was not in money or social status, but in the love and responsibility he had been too cowardly to accept. Back at the Coleman farm, Helena put Michael in his crib and watched him sleep for a few minutes. The boy smiled in his sleep, probably dreaming of his day's adventures with Hope. She went out onto the porch and looked at the stars. The same ones she had watched on that terrible night in the forest when she thought she would lose everything. Now they seemed to shine with a promise of hope, reminding her that even in the darkest moments, light always finds a way to shine through. The night breeze carried the soft sound of Hope moving in the pasture, watching over the sleep of the family. he had chosen to protect. Helena closed her eyes and smiled, knowing that tomorrow would be another day full of possibilities, love, and the comforting presence of those who truly cared for her. The storm had passed, and a new dawn awaited.